They bulldozed my private bridge without warning, so I drained the entire lake their $5 million homes sit on. Sounds extreme? Maybe. But when an arrogant HOA thinks they can destroy your property and walk away clean, sometimes the only way to fight back is to sink everything around them. This is how I turned their dream lakefront into a muddy disaster and made them rebuild what they destroyed. You won't believe what a small wooden bridge started. It's wild how the simplest things, quiet, peaceful things, can spark the biggest battles. And this battle, it started with a handmade bridge and ended with an entire lake drained and multi-million-dollar homes reduced to soggy real estate disasters. My name's Jason, and I used to think living next to a lake was the dream. And for a while it really was. I live in a quiet, scenic neighborhood wrapped around this gorgeous private lake. It's not huge, but it's big enough to feel like something out of a travel magazine. Glassy water in the morning, loons calling at dusk, trees dancing on the surface. The kind of place people pay millions to live next to. Me? I was one of the lucky ones. I bought early, before the lake got popular, before the money moved in, before the HOA took over like some kind of suburban empire. My house was modest, nothing flashy. 2-bedroom, older siding, big trees out front. But it had character, and more importantly, it came with land. Not just lake access, actual land that jutted into the water. My lot wrapped around part of the shoreline and even included a tiny island, maybe 30 feet across, about 20 feet out from the shore. And that's where the bridge comes in. I built it myself, not some big steel construction or anything. It was a little wooden footbridge, 4 feet wide, just enough for a wheelbarrow or 2 chairs. It arched slightly like those little garden bridges you see in Japanese parks. I stained the wood by hand. I added solar lights along the railings, and I made sure it was solid, permitted, safe, inspected, fully legal. It became my favorite place in the world. Mornings, I'd walk out there with coffee and listen to the ducks. Evenings, I'd watch the sunset with my son or cast a line into the water. It's where I went to think, to breathe, to escape. It's where I proposed to my wife. But you know what people hate? They hate seeing someone enjoy something they can't control, especially people who run HOAs. Here's the backstory. You need to know my land, see, was grandfathered in. When the Homeowners Association was formed around the lake about 12 years ago, my property wasn't included. I wasn't obligated to pay HOA dues. I wasn't bound to their rules. I didn't have to submit forms to plant a bush or change the color of my shed. Why? Because I bought my land before the HOA even existed. The developers never included my parcel in the common community covenants. And so, legally and structurally, I was outside of their reach. To be honest, for most of that time, it wasn't a problem. Sure, a few board members would side-eye me at the annual lake cleanup, or I'd get passive-aggressive flyers in my mailbox about lake uniformity. But I minded my business. I kept my land clean. And I was always respectful to neighbors, until the new board came in. It happened gradually. Some of the old-timers moved away. A few of the new buyers had that I-run-the-show energy. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't just about maintaining common areas or organizing barbecues. It was about control. And I was their loose thread, their wild card, their ungoverned rebel sitting on valuable shoreline, daring to enjoy the lake without paying their $700 a month dues. That bridge, they hated it. I started hearing whispers. At a block party, someone casually asked if I'd ever considered taking it down. A board member emailed me a concern about structural integrity, despite the fact that it had been inspected by the city just a year before. Another neighbor claimed it was blocking the natural flow of the lake. Total nonsense, especially since it sat over still water between 2 land masses I owned. But the real kicker, they said it was an eyesore. An eyesore? Compared to what? Your bright blue pontoon boat or the neon flamingo you park on your dock every summer? Please. It was clear they didn't care about the bridge itself. They cared that they didn't approve it, that I didn't ask their permission, that I didn't grovel to their made-up aesthetic standards. They were furious that I could do something without them. I wish I could say it ended there, that I ignored them and they moved on. But I'd be lying. Because what happened next was one of the most infuriating, illegal, and petty moves I've ever experienced, and it set off a chain reaction that they never saw coming. It was a Monday morning. The sky was gray, and I remember it clearly because I had just made coffee and was heading out to the bridge like I always did. I walked down my path and stopped cold. Heavy machinery. In my backyard. A bulldozer. Guys in vests and hard hats were swarming the area, already halfway through dismantling the bridge. Wood planks were stacked up like firewood. One of the workers had a chainsaw in his hand. My solar lights were ripped out and thrown in a pile like trash. I ran out there, panicked, shouting over the noise. "Hey! Hey! What the hell is going on?" The guy barely looked up. HOA told us to take it down, said it was an unapproved structure interfering with the lake's shoreline. I was stunned. HOA? They don't even have jurisdiction over my property. Look, man, I just follow the orders. You can take it up with them. They didn't even stop. I watched helplessly as years of memories, of effort, of love, were reduced to a splintered pile. My wife cried when she got home. My son was confused, asking why they took away our special place. And me? I was done playing nice. It was a Monday morning, gray skies, no wind, just the eerie stillness of a quiet lakeside neighborhood. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready to enjoy a peaceful start to my day like always. But what I saw made the mug drop right out of my hands. Bulldozers, 2 of them. In my backyard. At first, my brain couldn't even process it. I thought maybe they were lost, maybe working on a neighbor's lot. But no. The noise, the shouting, the clatter of wood being torn apart, it was all coming from my bridge. My bridge, the one I built, the one I loved, the one that had been standing for years, solid, safe, and completely legal. I ran. Barefoot, still in pajamas, heart pounding. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" The crew barely blinked. One guy, wearing a yellow vest and chewing gum like it was a casual Tuesday, looked at me and said, "We're just following orders. The HOA hired us to remove this structure." He gestured casually to my bridge, now halfway destroyed. Planks pulled up, railings snapped. My solar lights shattered on the grass. I couldn't breathe. "Remove? Are you out of your mind? You can't just come onto my property like this." Another guy walked over, maybe the foreman, clipboard in hand. "We were told this was an unauthorized structure interfering with community lake access. We're contracted to remove it, that's all I know." Unauthorized? That word hit me like a slap. I stared at him, trying to stay calm. "I have permits. This bridge was approved and inspected. It's been here for years. This is private property. My property. You're trespassing." He shrugged. "Talk to the HOA." And with that, they kept going, ripping apart years of memories with zero hesitation. The phone call that lit the fire. I stormed back into the house, grabbed my phone, and called the HOA president. She answered on the second ring. "Hello? It's Jason. Are you out of your mind? What is going on in my backyard right now?" "Oh, Jason," she said, in that fake sweet voice that makes your skin crawl. "We sent a contractor to deal with that structure by the lake. We've received multiple complaints. It was unsightly and possibly unsafe." "Unsightly? Are you kidding me? That bridge was permitted, inspected, and on my land." She didn't even flinch. "You're not part of the HOA, Jason. That's been a concern for years. But this impacts the lake, which we do oversee. We had to act in the best interest of the community." I was speechless for a second. My hands shook. "You had no right to touch it. No notice, no hearing, Nothing. You're not a member, Jason. You don't get a notice. You don't get to say no. And then she hung up. Just like that. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to reason. That bridge was more than wood and nails. It was family memories. It was the place I proposed to my wife. It was the spot my kid caught his first fish. And they destroyed it. Not because of safety, not because of permits, but because they couldn't control it. Because they hated that I was free. They crossed the line, and I wasn't just going to rebuild. I stood on my now ruined shoreline staring at the mess, splintered beams, muddy tire tracks, a broken railing floating in the shallows. They thought I'd be intimidated, that I'd grumble and walk away, that I'd rebuild quietly or maybe move on. Number. They didn't just destroy my bridge, they declared war. And they didn't realize I had a secret weapon, one they hadn't even considered. See, when I bought this land years ago, I did my homework. I knew it was outside the HOA boundaries. I made sure. But I also bought something they completely overlooked, the lake bed. That's right, not the water, not the dock, the actual land under the lake, a portion of it anyway. Around 30% of it belonged to me. And guess where the prettiest, most valuable section of lakefront property sat? Right along the edge of my lake bed. That meant the ground beneath their water access, the shoreline where they parked boats, built docks, and bragged to guests about the view, was mine. Legally. On paper. Recorded with the county. For years, it hadn't mattered. I never made a fuss. I loved the lake as much as anyone else. I didn't care if people floated over my section of the water. We all shared it. But now I had a legal right to drain my section. If I deemed it necessary for maintenance, environmental reasons, or property care. And suddenly, the idea of a quiet, peaceful lake didn't sound so appealing anymore. The planning begins. I wasn't just angry, I was ready first. I called a lawyer, a real estate attorney who nearly fell out of his chair, laughing when I told him the story. When I showed him the property lines, the easement rights, and the lakebed deed, he said one thing. Jason, you could bury them in lawsuits, but I have a better idea. Together, we crafted the plan. We followed every regulation. We filed environmental assessments. We submitted the right notices to the city. We documented the damage they'd done to my land, and trust me, bulldozers leave deep scars. Then I called in a contractor, one who specialized in water management systems. You see, I had an old overflow gate built into the property line, something most people didn't even notice, tucked into the brush, a structure from decades ago, back when the area was farmland. It still worked, and once opened, it would lower the water level, starting with my section of the lake and gradually pulling the shoreline down all around it. They thought I'd just get over it. That was their biggest mistake. They thought I'd just swallow the injustice, that I'd patch up the damage, that I'd tuck my tail between my legs and ask for permission. But I wasn't rebuilding a bridge. I was tearing down their kingdom. Here's what they didn't realize. They thought they were dealing with a regular homeowner. They thought I was just some quiet guy with an old house and a wooden bridge. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to check, was that when I bought this land years ago, I didn't just buy the house, the shoreline, or that little island. I bought part of the actual lake bed. Not the whole lake, but enough, 30% of it. That's right, nearly 1/3 of the land beneath the water was mine, fully deeded, legally recorded. And you better believe I had the documents to prove it. It was an unusual deal even back then. See, before the area became this upscale HOA utopia, the land was rural, old farmland. Developers bought it up and turned it into luxury homes, but the lake itself wasn't originally one natural body of water. It had been partially expanded and reshaped over time, pushed and pulled with permits and patience. When I bought in, the seller was offloading everything, house, island, and yes, a large portion of the lake bed. I didn't think much of it at the time. Honestly, it felt like a novelty. Own a slice of the lake bed, the listing had said. I thought neat and signed the dotted line. But now, standing on the edge of a ruined bridge with bulldozer tracks in my grass and years of peace destroyed by an HOA power trip, that old paperwork had suddenly become my most powerful weapon. What that meant. Legally. Here's the thing about owning lakebed property. It's not like owning a boat or a dock. It gives you rights. Real rights. My deed explicitly allowed for maintenance, water management, sediment control, and environmental modifications. That meant I could install water diversion systems, modify the depth of the lake in my section, temporarily drain water for preservation or repair, prevent access to the land underneath the lake I owned. And guess what else? All their million-dollar homes? The ones with the glittering docks, custom staircases, fancy party decks, and panoramic lakefront views. They were built along the portion of the lake that sat over my lake bed. For years, I let it go. I didn't mind the boats or the occasional kayaker drifting over. I didn't care that people fished from the far side or floated on pool noodles. I loved the lake as much as anyone, probably more. But now? Now they had torn down my bridge, trespassed on my land, and smiled while doing it. They left me with nothing but muddy tire tracks and a broken heart. So I did what they didn't think I'd do. I lawyered up. The plan was set. I met with a real estate and environmental lawyer who had one word when he saw my deed. Wow. He looked at the HOA bylaws. He reviewed the trespassing and damage photos. He studied the contract they'd signed with the bulldozer crew. Then he leaned back in his chair, smiled, and said, "They're toast." But I wasn't just interested in lawsuits. Sure, I could sue them for destruction of property, unauthorized entry, and emotional distress. But that would take years, and I wanted something more. Direct. I wanted them to feel what they did to me, to see it, every single day. So we found a legal path, one they couldn't stop, one that followed state law, environmental regulation, and local zoning codes to the letter. And then we filed the paperwork. It was boring stuff on the surface, technical applications for lakebed maintenance, water level adjustment, sediment control, and shoreline restoration. But the result? The result would be anything but boring. The drain begins. I called in a contractor, an old pro who'd done work on ponds, marshes, and yes, even private lakes like this. Hidden on the far side of my property, where the tree line thickened and the brush grew wild, sat a piece of old infrastructure, a gravity-fed overflow pipe. It had been there since the land's early development days, a relic from when the lake was used for irrigation and flood control. With a little inspection and a lot of paperwork, we got it reactivated, and then we opened it. The first few days? Nothing dramatic. Just a slow trickle, a quiet gurgling from beneath the surface. Then the water began to shift. Lower. Gradually. But noticeably. Boats started sitting unevenly on their docks. Fish began swimming in tighter spaces. Shorelines began to recede. And that's when the phone calls started. Panic at the mansions. "Jason, what's happening to the lake? Did you notice the water looks low? Is there a leak somewhere? Should we call the city?" And finally, the one I'd been waiting for, a call from the HOA president herself. "Jason, are you doing something to the lake?" I paused, smiled to myself, and said, "Yes." There was a silence on the line. "I'm conducting maintenance on my portion of the lake bed. Totally legal. I've filed all the paperwork." "You can't do that." "I can. I own that section, remember? You know, the one your members' homes sit next to? The one with all the docks and views and lake access? This is retaliation. You're punishing the entire community." "No," I said calmly. "You punish the community. You destroyed my property. I'm just taking care of mine." She threatened legal action, of course. I welcomed it. My lawyer had already prepared a full brief. There was nothing they could do. They had crossed a line, and now their precious lakefront paradise was turning into a soggy, muddy mess. Boats sat on dry land. Docks stood crooked in the air. Homeowners with million-dollar views were suddenly staring at cracked earth and weeds. And every time they looked out the window, they saw it. The consequences of their arrogance. And I wasn't done yet, see. Draining the lake wasn't permanent. Eventually, it would be restored. But I wasn't just draining water. I was draining power. I was showing them that no matter how many meetings they held, how many forms they created, or how many bulldozers they sent, they couldn't control me. They couldn't erase me. And every single time they walked out to their dock and saw a rowboat lying sideways in the mud, they'd remember. You messed with the wrong neighbor. I filed the right notices. I followed the law. The HOA had broken mine, my property, my trust, my peace. And I wasn't going to fight back with rage. I was going to fight back with precision. It all came down to a pipe, hidden on my land, buried under trees and brush, ignored by nearly everyone but me. An old sluice gate, part of the original overflow system built decades before these homes even existed. Rusty, but functional. I had it inspected, reinforced, and logged as a maintenance project with the local municipality. Nothing flashy, nothing illegal. And then, on a quiet Thursday morning, I walked out there alone. No witnesses, no announcements. I turned the wheel, and just like that, the water began to fall. The drop was subtle. At first, it wasn't dramatic. Not at first. The water crept away like a low tide retreating from the shore. Slow, silent, almost respectful. But by sunset, it was obvious. Boats that used to float with dignity were now leaning sideways, awkwardly balanced like drunken flamingos. Jet skis, once lined up for weekend warriors, sat stranded in puddles, their sleek bodies dusted in algae. The residents didn't know what was happening. Not yet. They assumed it was weather. Drought, maybe. Or a leak. They speculated in Facebook groups and whispered at the mailbox cluster. But I knew. And I watched. Every morning, I sipped coffee on my deck, staring out at the lake as it transformed into a shrinking bowl of water. And I felt no guilt. This wasn't vengeance. It was balance. The HOA freaks out by day 3. Panic began to spread. The water line was now noticeably lower, 2 feet down from its usual level. Docks groaned. Fish flopped in new shallows. Ducks waddled awkwardly across exposed reeds. Homeowners started calling the HOA in a frenzy. Why's the lake shrinking? Is the water safe? Are our foundations in danger? And most importantly, is this going to hurt our home values? That last one? That's what really scared them. By the end of the week, the water had dropped 4 feet. The once luxurious lakefront homes now looked like they backed up to a muddy retention ditch. Patios that used to touch water now overlooked cracked earth and slime. It was chaos. Emergency meetings and cease and desists. The HOA scrambled into action like ants after a boot stomp. They called emergency meetings, Zoom calls, conference room debates, door-to-door flyers, panic in pressed polo shirts. They sent me 3 cease and desist letters, 1 threat of legal action, and an HOA formal warning, even though I wasn't even a member. They claimed I was endangering the local ecosystem, disturbing lake wildlife, disrupting community harmony, and intentionally damaging property values. But here's the thing. Legally, I was fine. I had filed all the correct paperwork. The city signed off. The water management department had no objections. The state laws on lakebed maintenance were crystal clear. I wasn't draining the lake maliciously. I was maintaining my portion of the lakebed for ecological and property integrity. Their words, not mine. And if that maintenance required adjusting water levels temporarily, well, so be it. I let the lawyers handle the screaming. My lawyer handled all communications. They threatened. We replied with calm documentation. They accused. We sent them copies of the deed, permits, and state water regulations. They even tried to say the water didn't belong to me. But when we reminded them I owned the lake bed and had been paying taxes on it for over a decade, silence. They were outplayed. They had assumed I was just another homeowner. But I had done my homework from the very start. They destroyed my bridge with bulldozers and arrogance. Now they had docks in dirt and property values in freefall. And the irony? Every single thing I did was legal. The neighborhood melts down. By the end of week 2, things had gone nuclear. Residents were yelling at board members in the street. One guy, I think his name was Rick, screamed about sue-worthy damages because his $50,000 dock was now leaning on dry mud. Another woman cried during a meeting because she bought her home for the lakefront sunsets, and now her kids were playing in muck instead of water. Real estate agents began canceling listings. New buyers backed out of deals. Lenders grew nervous, and suddenly the HOA, once smug and superior, was now holding emergency budget meetings to discuss retention strategies. They finally came to my door. One sunny afternoon, after nearly 3 weeks of chaos, the HOA president herself came knocking. Clipboard in hand, tight smile, sunglasses too big for her face. "Jason," she said, trying to sound civil, "we really need to talk." I invited her onto the porch. Politely, she made her pitch. "Maybe we could reach some kind of compromise. Perhaps if you close the drain and let the water level restore, the HOA could help cover the cost of rebuilding your bridge. We could even discuss honorary membership if that's something you'd consider." I nearly laughed. They bulldozed my bridge without warning, mocked me, ignored me. And now that their lakeside kingdom was crumbling, they wanted peace talks? So I smiled back and said, "I already rebuilt the bridge, stronger than before, and I paid for it myself." She looked confused. Then I added, "But sure, I'll close the gate. Eventually. After the ecosystem finishes rebalancing, you understand, of course, property maintenance takes time." She knew she was beat. She nodded, muttered a thank you, and left with the quiet resignation of a defeated tyrant. Balance restored. Eventually, I did close the gate. The water returned slowly, the way it left. The docks lifted, the fish returned, the ducks came back. But the community? It was never the same. The HOA president resigned 6 months later. 3 board members sold their homes and moved away. And the new board? Let's just say, they don't mess with me anymore. They wave, they smile, they even ask for my opinion during meetings. Funny how that works. For 2 whole months, the lake stayed drained. Gone were the days of peaceful kayaks and glittering reflections. What remained was a muddy basin of exposed reeds, sun-baked silt, and a growing sense of regret in every $1-million home around me. The silence on those streets? Deafening. No more dock parties, no more waterside barbecues, no more smug waves from HOA board members and golf carts. The only thing floating now was tension. Property values tumbled. You could feel it in the air. Real estate agents stopped showing homes. Listings were quietly pulled offline. Appraisals came in tens of thousands of dollars lower than expected. One family tried to sell their house and got 0 offers after 3 weeks on the market. Another neighbor cornered me at the grocery store asking if there was anything I could do to refill the lake, as if it was just a garden hose. And then came the lawsuits. Someone tried to sue me. One particularly loud resident, let's call him Carl, decided he was going to make me pay. He filed a lawsuit claiming I had intentionally destroyed community property, interfered with his recreational rights, and cost him thousands in potential resale value. The whole thing went to mediation. I didn't say much. I just handed over my deed. The environmental permits, the timeline of HOA violations, and about 24 photos of bulldozers ripping through my bridge without permission. The mediator read everything, slowly closed the file, and looked directly at Carl. "Sir, This case is not going to work out the way you think. He lost. Miserably. The power shift. With that lawsuit dead in the water, no pun intended, the pressure finally shifted. The community started asking real questions. Why had the HOA acted so aggressively? Why hadn't they followed due process? How could they let it get this far? The old HOA president. She tried to hold it together, but it didn't work. Emails leaked, residents grew angrier, board meetings got heated, and finally, she resigned. No press release, no ceremony, just a quiet exit and a for sale sign in her front yard a few weeks later. Good riddance. Then came the knock. About a month after the resignation, I got a knock on my front door. It wasn't a certified letter this time. No clipboard, no folded arms, no fake smiles. It was two new HOA board members, freshly elected, clearly nervous but respectful. One of them introduced himself and said, "We wanted to apologize." Sincerely, that stopped me in my tracks. They didn't blame me. They didn't make excuses. They just stood there and took accountability. And then they asked if we could talk. My one condition. I said yes, but with one condition. You rebuild my bridge, not as a gift, not as a neighborly favor, as reparations. You destroy something of mine without cause, you rebuild it, with your funds, on your dime. There was a pause, a long one. Then they nodded. We'll bring it to a vote. The vote passed unanimously. Apparently, the rest of the board didn't even argue. They knew what had happened was wrong. Within 2 weeks, I had contractors at my property, licensed, insured, and ready to build. This time, it wasn't me out there with a hammer and a weekend of free time. This was a full rebuild, proper supports, treated lumber, railings, everything. And guess what? They did it better than I ever could have. The bridge returned, not just as a memory, but as a monument. The lake is full again. With the bridge back in place, I finally closed the sluice gate for good. The water came back slowly, like a tide returning after a long storm. Fish swam again, boats floated, the lake sparkled the way it used to. People smiled again. I even got a few thank you notes. But this time, it was different, because now they knew. They knew who owned what. They knew what could happen when power is abused. They knew I wasn't just some quiet guy with a piece of land and a wooden bridge. The HOA learned its lesson. The new board hasn't bothered me since. No more passive-aggressive notes, no more violations, no more pretending I don't belong. They respect my space. They respect my land. And most importantly, they respect my bridge. It stands there today, strong, proud, peaceful, just like it always should have. The moral of the story? Don't let arrogance go unchecked. Don't assume silence equals weakness. And never, ever mess with someone's peace just because you wear a title. Because sometimes, when you bulldoze a bridge, you destroy your own path in the process. But if you're lucky, and you admit your mistake, and you truly make it right, well, maybe that bridge can be rebuilt, stronger than ever. So next time someone tries to walk all over you, remember this. Don't just get mad, get smart. And if you can, own the lake. This has been Jason's story. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, subscribe for more crazy real-life tales, and drop a comment. What would you have done if someone destroyed your bridge? Thanks for watching.